he's not only doing things that I think are harmful to the American people, he's doing them in a way that is harmful to our system of justice and democracy.
The Democrats are finally getting down in the mud and fighting dirty with Donald Trump as his legal onslaught against our democracy continues to get smacked down by the lower courts, who are proving to be more of a deterrent to Trump's agenda than anything else, with a stunning 96% loss rate for Trump in the courtroom. Let's take a look at a few examples here and highlight the Democratic legal strategy, which has been our greatest weapon so far in this fight. Here's the headline from Notice: Democrats' hot new legal strategy is to use conservative wins against Trump. Now that's the kind of stuff I like to see. When the Department of Health and Human Services tried to claw back more than $10 billion in public health grants earlier this year, 20 blue state attorney generals sued by pointing to the major questions doctrine, a Supreme Court precedent Democrats have otherwise lambasted and conservatives have long embraced. The strategy worked, at least temporarily. A district judge issued an injunction siding with the states in mid-May, pointing in part to the major questions doctrine argument. Both Supreme Court rulings were massive wins for the conservative legal movement and were, in large part, thanks to a court packed with Donald Trump's nominees. Now, Democrats see the legal landscape Trump paved in his first term as a weapon that they can use to exploit against him. With these right-wing doctrines, it's as far as they want to go. It doesn't depend on anything the left does. Craig Green, an administrative law professor at Temple University, told Notice, "This is the argument that an attorney general might use to say, we gotta use what we can. You go to war with the tools you have, not the tools you want." And I think that is the perfect phrase to describe the Democrats' legal strategies so far in this second administration. The left is not setting the playing field here, but that doesn't mean that we can't use the same tools that the right has been using to delay or dismantle Trump's agenda. Democratic state attorneys were brought out for a hearing today where they testified about suing the Trump administration. Check it out.
So, Attorney General Campbell, you've really been leading a lot of the fight against these cuts. Can you talk more about the research you see being endangered and why the cases you're leading are so critical to the health of your constituents in Massachusetts, mine in Pennsylvania, and folks across the country?
Thank you, Representative, for the question, but also the broad and expansive frame here. I'm really proud, as I said earlier, of the response from my colleagues in coming together to protect access to all NIH funding, because it's not just about the life-saving piece of a clinical trial, for example, that is under threat. It is about jobs, internships. We had a researcher at Harvard working on antibiotics. It's about our global standing in the world when it comes to how we're advancing that medical research, and that job is now under threat. We have Mass General Brigham in Massachusetts, which receives patients from all around the world, the largest recipient of NIH funding, that has had to cut various programs because of the uncertainty. So I'm always careful, I think, in defining how we're winning, because I never want to discount the real harm that people are suffering and experiencing, even as we sit here. You can't just turn back on a clinical trial, and if you've missed one part of it, that can mean all of your clinical trials going forward are over, and that means life or death for an individual, for a family, for a child. So I am at the same time hopeful and optimistic about the response from the courts here, both Democratic and Republican appointed judges who recognize the unlawful violations and actions of this administration to undermine not just the NIH funding in our respective states, but the public health infrastructure of our country. And this has to do with our global security as well. It has to do with our economy as a whole. And then if you think about it, affordability is still the number one issue. It also, of course, creates uncertainty with respect to what people have to pay to get the care they so desperately need, along with the jobs they so desperately need. So we're very grateful for the preliminary injunction that we won back in April. We're also grateful of the recent decision we won in NIH2, pushing the envelope a little bit in terms of what the law could do to protect folks and organizations that are seeking this funding. including those folks who were granted the funding, but then the administration unlawfully cut it off. So we're going to keep fighting the fight with respect to this funding, regardless of what political affiliation is by someone's name or what state they are in. And we will continue to do it with a sense of urgency.
Really appreciate your work on that. Thank you.
Now, this use of the Republican legal arsenal is proving to be an effective strategy where applicable. Here's another example of how Democrats are leveraging conservative wins against them. Here's the headline from Raw Story. This under-the-radar Supreme Court case could upend Trump's plans. And they're talking here about the case of the National Rifle Association versus Vullo. In that 2024 case, the court said that it's a clear violation of the First Amendment's free speech provisions for government to force people to speak and act in ways that are aligned with its policies. In this case, the state of New York was trying to stop businesses from supporting the NRA. This somewhat under-the-radar, yet incredibly important decision is likely to figure prominently in Supreme Court rulings in a slew of those cases in the coming months and years, including law firms, universities, and PBS. Many of the current targets of the Trump administration's actions have claimed similar suppression of their First Amendment rights by the government. They fought back, filing lawsuits that often cite the NRA versus Vullo decision in their efforts. To date, the most egregious examples of actions that violate the principles announced by the court, the executive orders against law firms, have largely been halted in the lower courts, and those decisions often citing what's now known as the Vullo decision. Using their wins against them is how we're going to be able to chip away at the power that Trump is trying to legally gain. And all of these stories of Democratic victories in the lower courts sound pretty similar because there have been an onslaught of losses handed down to Trump. Adam Bonica from On Data and Democracy did excellent work here analyzing the data on these cases, and what he found was shocking. Here's the headline. The 96% rebellion. District courts mount historic resistance, but the Supreme Court looms. In May 2025, federal district courts ruled against the Trump administration in 26 of 27 cases, a stunning 96% loss rate. This represents a dramatic acceleration of the cross-ideological resistance I documented in March. This isn't just another data point. It suggests a potential inflection point in the judiciary's engagement with an executive that has constantly tested constitutional boundaries. Look at this amazing chart here. So Trump's loss rate is actually getting worse. In February, it was at 53.8%, then 74.3% in March, then 76.1% in April, and then it jumped up to 96.3%. It seems like Trump is getting legally desperate here, lobbing Hail Marys at the court that are just getting smacked down left and right. And I just wanted to leave you guys with a clip from today's hearing because I think Jamie Raskin's question here about the role that state AGs are playing right now in maintaining federalism and stopping Trump's attempts to reshape our democracy is incredibly potent.
I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on that role you're playing in terms of making federal law work for everybody in the country as a state attorney general.
Chairman Raskin, we regard the laws that Congress passes as fundamentally the prerogative of the people who populate this country and send members to Congress. And so for an executive to usurp the role of Congress in appropriations or establishment of agencies or anything like that, we view as an outrageous overreach that simply cannot be tolerated. As I noted in my comments, the things that the president is trying to do, you probably can do if you follow the rules, but you cannot do it vis-a-vis executive order or edict or proclamation or this is how I feel this morning. The fact is that there are procedures that they can follow. They got to go to Congress. You want to abolish the Department of Education. As horrible of an idea as I believe that is, you have to go through Congress to do that. So he's not only doing things that I think are harmful to the American people, he's doing them in a way that is harmful to our system of justice and democracy.
Great. And then finally, forgive me,
I was just going to note, Representative Raskin, that what you said at the start of this is the core of many of the lawsuits we filed. Article 1 gives this body the broadest powers, particularly when it comes to passing laws, spending money. And a bulk of the cases we have talked about and have brought have been the president. When we say he can't act like a king, it means he can't take actions that you have done and put into law, signed into law by a president, passed by a Congress, and decide on a whim that he wants to, say, convert a Department of Transportation highway program into an immigration enforcement program. That is not what the Constitution allows. And so our lawsuits have been about standing up in many ways for the authority of this body to do the important work that it does.
Now, of course, the biggest barrier is Trump's packing of the Supreme Court. The judges of the lower courts clearly have their heads screwed on tightly, but the Supreme Court has never been more polarized. It feels weird to say that the future of our democracy is in the hands of someone like Amy Coney Barrett, but that is unfortunately the case. I'm Tony Hinderman with Really American, and I'll catch you next time.